Hey, good afternoon, everybody. To those who have joined us today. Um, Today's session, I just want to steal 10 minutes before we actually start with our Learning Unit 7, um, because I just want to go over some key points sort of post-grading your assignment. Um, just some pointers to remember when you are doing your final POE. Remember, at the point that you're doing your final or after your final POE, we won't have a session, obviously. So it's sort of taken as a test or an examination. Um, Hi, Francis. Um, so yeah, we're going to do a national support session very quickly. So quick 10 minutes. Any questions at all, you can just let me know. I have officially, well, your grading has already been done. I'm just waiting for your results to basically be captured onto the system for it to be released. So I'm hoping that will happen by tomorrow, if not tomorrow, over the weekend. Um, I actually had fun grading your assignments or your part 1 POE. There was a lot of different variations of the assignment. No two people had the same format. Everybody used their own personalities in the assignment, which was really good. Something that I really wanted to see. Let's just go through ICE task before we begin. ICE task 3 is obviously now due tomorrow. So once you are done submitting that, I will grade that over the weekend, hopefully early next week, towards the end of next week. Once it's loaded on, you'll get your assignments or your results. ICE Task 4 is going to be released on the 10th of October. That due date is the 17th of October. That due date will not be changed. The final deadline for all of ICE tasks to be submitted is the 22nd of October. So we cannot go over that, and it still takes generally about a week for it to be loaded onto the system. So just make sure that you know reach that due date of the 17th. If you have not submitted any ICE tasks, so from 1 right down to 3, please just submit it before the 17th. I will still grade it, but the reason why we're putting deadlines with the ICE tasks is to hold you accountable, so you're not sitting at the end of the semester with 4 ICE tasks and a part 2 POE. So it's just to keep things moving. And I think as well, you learn a lot through the ICE task because a lot of the content is covered in your POEs. So use that as your practice rounds before you actually do your final POE. Okay, so I'm quickly going to go over part of your national support session. So this is the one and only, basically, that you're going to be doing. So just a reminder on the due date of assignments. Your next POE is due on the 7th of November. So take that into account. Make sure that you remember when it's due. What I did pick up with this assignment, everybody obviously, well, they submitted on time, but sort of crunch time, moving closer towards the 23:59. And people were submitting and they didn't realize that their safe assign percentage was too high. They were then submitting again and submitting again. And yeah, don't put yourself under pressure like that. So just pace yourself out, work towards your pacer. Remember, we did Learning Unit 6 already, and then it's Learning Unit 7. According to the POE pacer part 2 that I've given you, work in conjunction with that. So post today's session, you would be at least able to answer 3 questions of your POE. You can always go back, refine, finalize, etc., but just make sure you have a pacer available to guide you throughout the POE. Submit via SafeAssign and not via email. I will not be able to mark any emails at all. It has to be through SafeAssign. It has to go through SafeAssign and submit it on VC Learn. Consistently work towards your assignment. As I said, use your paces. If anything goes wrong with your submission, you take a screenshot, you send it to VC Assist, and you always inform me. There's various students that, if they had an error in something or they were a bit afraid of their safe assign percentage being too high, they've always informed me. So I know when I am grading the assignment, I need to look out for X person who told me this. So just make sure you are always informing me. Referencing guide, please take that into account. This POE here, the safe assignment percentages for a lot of people were pretty high. I had to basically pull out originality reports for almost every student just to make sure that there wasn't direct copy and pasting from anywhere. So just make sure that you are referencing correctly so nothing's being flagged. Any additional information you need to look at you away from the MO is very important. So your module outline basically just outlines for that specific module or that specific learning unit what you need to focus on. But it's always nice to get additional information. So a lot of students had used in their Part 1 POE examples from other automotive companies, which is great because then I know you're thinking out of the box. Using examples of just in time in like a Toyota, for instance. So it's looking at things from a completely different perspective. You're not just reading a textbook, looking at the MO, or just looking at my slides. You are looking at other information that can guide you and help you. Always submit in PDF, very important. A lot of times when you submit in Word, things get shifted. The way that you thought you submitted is not the way that I'm receiving it. So just make sure that you're submitting in PDF and no photo conversion. Yes, I know it's sort of obvious, but you'll be surprised at the number of students that actually submit in a photo conversion. Okay. Key areas for improvement: read the question, understand it clearly, bring in your theory as well as apply to your relevant case study, and make sure that you reference. So there was certain cases where students either missed out questions or there was cases where there was no theory involved, but only application, or there was only application and there was no theory. So just make sure you are reading the questions. One very important topic that I need to bring up is make sure you are checking what the rubric or the marking rubric is. If a question is telling you that you need to have, explain something and it's not 20 marks, make sure you're covering the content for 20 marks. Don't have 2 sentences for 20 marks. There's not enough information in 2 sentences for me to actually give you 20 marks. So make sure you are reading that, you're understanding it, and you are then answering the question that's applicable to that specific marking rubric. Okay, structure of assignment, cover page, contents page. Contents page is obviously optional, but I think majority of this class had covered it from a contents page perspective. Grammar, sentence construction, and a closing paragraph. So a lot of everybody had done that, but just so that on the safe side for the last POE, remember the last POE does go through moderation. So I may be a little bit lenient, but the next person may not be. So just make sure you're covering the grounds, okay? Focus area is like reflections. Then this is sort of generalized. I don't think you guys have a reflections question in your POE. But your reflection questions is going to be very similar to in your own words sort of scenario. So just make sure that you are covering, this is what I've seen when I, when I did research with another company. Okay. Yep. And then just from a prep perspective, read your learning units, contextualize the information to the case study, bring in extra examples. Use your MO as a guideline to locate the content. I've provided you with a pacer, so that definitely does help. Look for keywords in your questions for the theoretical knowledge. Make sure you are covering the theoretical. When I get my memorandum, the memorandum always allocates marks towards theory and to application. So don't think that it's only application. You need to still use your theory. Pace yourselves when you're preparing your assignment. Understand how many questions and the amount of time that you do require. Don't leave anything for lastminute.com. Rubrics, very important, as well as a clear guideline provided on the question paper. Then you unpack the questions into what you need to identify, what you need to discuss, what you need to explain. So you're providing sufficient content. I know in your part 1 POE, there was certain questions that say, let me pull out, list any 5 advantages of cycle counting. Then you just need to list the 5. You're not really explaining. But when they're asking you to discuss it and they're asking you to differentiate, then you need to be explaining it both theoretically and application-wise. For ease of clarity, I mean, I used what I would normally use in my assignments, but you do you, and you stick to that throughout your entire assignment. The whole idea for me to say for ease of clarity is so you can understand that you're not starting with a font of 14 and finishing off with a font of 10. We want consistency throughout the assignment. It also gives your moderator or your grader, you know, a good look of your assignment and says, okay, no, this person actually does know what they're talking about. Look at how neat this is. Look, it's justified. You know, that sort of thing. So just make sure that your look of your actual POE is done correctly and you would not go wrong. And then obviously convert it to PDF again. Any questions so far? Okay, I'm assuming not. Let's just move on to your learning unit quickly. Okay, so today we are doing learning unit 7 and we're doing themes 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so I just thought that, you know, the learning unit itself is not that large, so we can cover everything in one session as opposed to breaking it up between a pre-recorded session and a live lecture. I actually enjoy the live lecture a lot more than just speaking to myself in a pre-recorded session. So just decided to merge that together. The next one that we have is a learning unit 8, which is fairly short. So we should be fine there on a pre-recorded session. And then 9 is a live lecture. We do have our last session, which is the 31st of October, which is a live lecture, but it's the 31st, it's Halloween, and I think it's Diwali as well. So I may convert that into a pre-recorded session, you know, just to give you some last-minute tips of how to tackle certain questions, etc. Okay, but let's move on to capacity. So what is capacity? Okay, let's take it down to our everyday life. And capacity is defined as the maximum amount that something can contain or produce. So when you're in the working environment and people give you a lot of work to do, you then say you've reached your capacity. So it's the maximum that you can possibly do. Unfortunately, in the working world, and I'm telling you from experience, there is no capacity. You just take and take and take. So I'm just preparing you for when you get out there, or if you're already there, then yeah, it is what it is. So an example is when your employees or customers of an airline, such as a FlySafair Air, yeah, that the organization is using the term seating capacity, or it means that there's a limit in the number of people that can safely be fitted into an aircraft. Okay, so it's just putting it into perspective, so you know that capacity now means that it's the maximum amount that it can contain. Okay, so from an important capacity perspective, yes, capacity and loading of containers, loading of tankers. So if you have a 6-meter container, you can only fill it up until, I think it's 12 tons, if I'm not mistaken. And then it's 24 to 26 tons on like a 12-meter container. So it's your capacity in terms of when you are loading that, or a tanker, that would be obviously in liters. So capacity is very important across various fields and different contexts within the fields, because it defines the limits of what can be achieved, what can be sustained, and what can be managed. So the first one is you maximizing your productivity and efficiency. So in a business sort of setting or operations setting, understanding what the capacity is essential for ensuring that your resources, whether your resources is a machine that you have in your operations department, or it's staffing, or even if it's time, all of these factors are used optimally. When you know the capacity of all of the systems, it helps you to basically plan what your production process is, and you're not overloading the system, you're not creating any sort of inefficiencies, or you're also not underutilizing any equipment. So you can actually meet the demand without causing any wastage. So for instance, let's say a manufacturing plant knows what its production capacity is, can now align what their output is going to be with the demand because they're reducing downtime and any sort of excess inventory. So it's maximizing what you currently have and making sure that what you have is now then efficient. Okay, the next one is meeting the demand and managing the growth. So capacity determines the ability to meet your demands, okay? So whether it's in a production environment, a service environment, or even in logistics, when capacity is not sufficient, there are risks of delays, you don't meet customer needs, you lose revenue in that capacity. So as businesses grow, your scaling capacity becomes more critical to handle because you're increasing your workload. So like a courier service, for instance, they must regularly assess its delivery capacity to handling the volumes, the growing volumes, basically, of the packages that they then deliver. So just making sure that you're meeting the demand or exceeding the demand, really. Effective resource allocation. So knowing your capacity helps with planning. Okay, so managing your resources effectively, it allows the businesses to allocate, whether it's time, whether it's money, it's equipment, or people, where it has the most sort of impact without overextending it. So understanding what your team capacity is in a working environment like an operations or a production, for instance, by understanding that it allows the manager in that department to assign the task more effectively, and then you don't have a burnout of any of your employees. So you are allocating your resources adequately and you're not over exerting one person over another person. Then ensuring quality and sustainability. When businesses basically go or work beyond their capacity, then you have less or lower quality. So, for example, if you are exceeding your production capacity, you might end up with defective products or error on your products. And if you're exceeding your human capacity, it may end up in burnout or human errors in that case. So you have to respect where your capacity limits are so that you have good quality. Quality is then maintained within your business. And then you have sustainability at the end of the day. We obviously want to keep business as sustainable as possible. You want to reduce wastage and reduce errors as well. Then we have strategic planning and scaling. So you have to regularly do capacity assessments to make sure that you're not under capacity or over capacity. So whether it's in your personal life or in your business or whatever sort of setting you currently in, understand what the current capacity is so that you can plan for future investments, expansions, improvements, whatever it is. So for instance, in a personal capacity, if you are within a personal capacity or current personal capacity, if you, for instance, decide that you want to take out, let's say, a personal loan, but you've reached a threshold, when your salary comes in and your debit orders go out and there's nothing basically left in there, you decide that you want to take out a personal loan. You've reached your capacity, basically. You cannot take it out because you would not be able to fulfill that obligation. So it's making sure you understand where your capacity is and you're not then over capacitating for it. Okay. Risk management. So basically working beyond what your capacity is increases the risk. Risk of failure, risk of inefficiency, risk of error, risk of wastage. So all of those bad words, you run the risk of it if you are working beyond the capacity. In contrast, if you're operating within the capacity limit, you can mitigate some of those risks. You can ensure that your operations is running smoothly, it's streamlined, there's unexpected, without any sort of unexpected disruptions. Like in logistics, for instance, exceeding a delivery capacity could lead to delays. You can end up with damaged goods. You can end up with customer dissatisfaction, which includes your brand reputation. It's like, so you guys obviously know I come from a logistics environment. So come Black Friday, and everybody decides that they want to send parcels and order online and. So you reach a point where you do reach the or exceed capacity on your operations floor or in your logistics warehouse, wherever that may be. And if you're just taking on more and more and more without understanding whether you do have the capacity to deliver it, it can cause various domino effects in your business unit. So, for instance, you now have stuff sitting on a floor for days and days, so delivery delays, unhappy customers. You run the risk of damage and breakages because it's been sitting there and someone can walk over it or go over it with a forklift or whatever that reason is. So there's a lot of byproducts of you just being over capacity when you need to stay within more of a limit. Innovation and flexibility. Yes. And I think it's more or less when you work on bigger trucks like horse and trailers, trot liners, etc., because you have to go through weigh bridges. When you go through weigh bridges, you end up getting pulled over and getting fined and having license disc taken away, and. So we all know, what you go through. So just making sure that you stick within the regulations, basically. Innovation and flexibility. So this is just having a clear understanding of by having this clear understanding of your capacity, it allows for a lot of businesses to innovate within their limits. It opens a door for you to be flexible, for you to adapt to the working environment. You can basically get new technologies. You can adopt automating processes. You can reorganize workflows because you're not inundated with stock or shipments or deliveries, etc. So you can adopt like AI tools to increase what your service capacity is without having to hire more people. So you can innovate but use your existing resources because your capacity is within limit. And then personal well-being. So this is both personal well-being as well as if you're working within a team, their well-being. It's you understanding what each person's personal capacity is from a physical, mental, emotional state. And that's how you can then maintain what the well-being. If you're stretching people beyond their capacity for extended periods of time, it can lead to stress, it can lead to burnout, it can lead to health issues, occupational health and safety, exhaustion can lead to incidents. Then you've got IODs out there. So yeah, just setting realistic goals for your staff or your team allows for there to be balance in the department. So you need somebody, especially from a management perspective, to recognize what the capacity of that specific team is, so you can prevent any sort of overworking. You can have a healthier workforce, a more motivated workforce. So capacity, as you can see, it can be looked at from various different stages. From an individual perspective, if you're a team leader, manager, supervisor, looking out at your team perspective, from a logistics and operations and production and manufacturing, even like additional services like an HR and a finance, everybody has a capacity limit. So when you're looking at capacity, think of it from a personal capacity and understand it from there. Where's your threshold? Where's your limit? Okay. Then we go through implementation of capacity. Okay, so capacity is implemented in various different ways across various different contexts. So to ensure that the resources, your processes, and your individual functions all function optimally. So the first one is capacity building or capacity planning. And capacity planning is forecasting what your future demands are and aligning it with your resources. Your resources may be your people, your equipment, your machinery, even your building infrastructure, so that you can meet those demands efficiently. You can look at different historical data, what the market trends are, or, that's how you then generate what your future growth or your future demand is going to be. And once you have those projections, your resources can be scaled according to what you think that projection is going to be. Like, for instance, in a logistics environment, a logistics company might analyze their peak season, which every logistics company does. They analyze their peak season and what their estimated delivery volumes are going to be. So then you decide that you're going to, in a scalable solution way, which you can click on or click off, how can you then increase vehicle capacity? Are you going to hire maybe 3 more vehicles for peak? And then you're going to take on 3 FTCs over a 4-month period just to meet those demands. So it's understanding what your planning is going to be. Capacity planning is a very, very important. It allows for businesses to not be caught with their pants down, basically, in peak periods especially. Capacity building. So this is basically strengthening a business or even a person's ability to perform effectively. It can be training, it can be giving them a new skill set, upgrading any sort of technology, or just investing in your infrastructure to get it to be, where you need it to be. You can have, continuous development programs to improve skills, to enhance technology. Maybe a global competitor has a specific technology that you want to adopt in your business. So understand what that is, or you want to just expand your infrastructure. So for instance, like for example, from an upskilling perspective, so LinkedIn Learning, there's courses there, or any other professional, development courses that an organization is providing, so that an employee can improve their ability, they can improve their skill. It can be a little bit more complex, and they can take on more complex tasks. Operational capacity management. This is to make sure that from an operational process perspective, you are running at an optimal level without exceeding what your resource limits are going to be, or your resource limits are, so that you are monitoring your production, you're monitoring your staff that takes care of the production, or just monitoring the system in general. You want to be able to track what the capacity is at all times. What is your employee workload? What is the machine usage rates? What is your stock on hand or your inventory level? So just making sure that all of the different functions are checked. Like for instance, if you have let's say it's a textile factory. Can everybody else hear me? Marisha says she can't hear. Okay. I think it's just you. Okay. So yeah, I think if you have a factory, for instance, you may schedule like regular maintenance checks for different machines, so that you don't have a breakdown when you're hitting full capacity, or you can stagger some of the shifts in terms of your workforce, so that you distribute the workloads evenly amongst every team. Then we have setting capacity limits. So making sure that you have a very clear boundary regarding what can be handled and within what time boundary, basically. So whether it's your employees' time, your resources, energy, whatever it may be, you are setting those limitations in place. Automation to basically increase capacity. So this is using technology to handle tasks that is more repetitive. So, in your assignment, you had your line process. So those are your repetitive tasks. So making sure that you have technology to handle that, or even if it's heavier tasks, you have technology to do that. Freeing up human resources so that they can do more brain stimulating exercises. And you wouldn't need human labor for the repetitive tasks, basically. Like for instance, also from a logistics perspective, you hear a lot of logistics examples coming from me, but when you have a route guide or a route optimization app that will plan out your deliveries for a particular day, it optimizes that sort of delivery route. So it increases the number of deliveries that you can do on a particular time within a certain time frame. So in the mornings, it generally becomes a delivery. In the afternoons, then it then becomes a collection. So making sure that you have an automated system there, so you can free up more capacity. So instead of having a driver and maybe two assistants, you know, have a driver and one assistant, and then you have one person that can, you know, clean up the floor or of parcels, or route them specifically in specific bays. So free up one person to actually do stuff that an automation cannot do. Okay. Scenario planning and any sort of like contingencies is basically preparing for a different outcome, but ensuring that there is enough capacity to handle any sort of unexpected situation. So, for instance, a courier service might have a contingency capacity in terms of having extra drivers or you know, temp staff or FTCs to cover any sort of sudden spikes in demand during different seasons. So there's always a trend with, especially when you deal a lot from an e-commerce perspective, your trends tend to become special holidays, you know, Valentine's Day, Mother's Day, Father's Day, Easter, Black Friday, Christmas, etc. So in those specific, yes, Black Friday as well, and Cyber Monday. So in those certain seasons, you have a scalable solution where you can obviously click on additional drivers or vehicles, and you have a scenario planning that you're now building. Balancing capacity and demand. So aligning your capacity with your current demand and what you are projecting your demand to be, so that you have efficiency and you have cost effectiveness. It's like, for instance, in a restaurant situation, you're adjusting your staff levels based on when your foot traffic is going to start during the week versus over the weekend. So, for instance, if it's during the week, you may not have as many servers in the restaurant if it's not a breakfast period and not a lunch period, you know, that in between periods. You may not have that many servers, but then come dinner time or come on a weekend, you now have amped up the number of servers. So you're balancing your capacity to what your demand is. And then the last one is delegation. So it's actually just distributing the task, something that I'm not the greatest at. I do not know how to delegate very well. I'm still learning how to do that. So it's allocating tasks and responsibilities according to what your team or even a person's capabilities are. So like, for instance, a branch manager is distributing a sales target according to the strengths and the workload of their sales team, so that nobody is overwhelmed. Now it's a little bit different. You work on people's cost to company, but previously how it used to work is you would allocate a sales target to a sales team. If there's 5 people in the team, one who probably can't cope that well has a little bit of a low target than the next person. So it's just delegating and distributing it according to somebody's capacity. Okay, are we all good and clear and understand capacity, and do we like capacity so far? So far, it's not bad. So far, it's not bad at all. So some of the critical capacity decisions. So your critical capacity decisions are basically strategic choices that a lot of the businesses must make in order for them to meet current and future demands while they're maximizing their resources. So a lot of these decisions often involve determining how much of capacity is needed, when can you then adjust your capacity, how can you allocate your different capacities. So making sure that you have the right capacity decision is extremely important so that your business has long-term success, especially in an industry where your demand is very unpredictable. So, you know, you may predict your demand is X, but it ends up being Z. So just making sure that you have these capacity or critical capacity decisions in place that you can scale. So the first one is determining optimal capacity level. So deciding how much is your capacity, um, and how much do you need from a capacity perspective in order for you to meet your demand without underutilizing or overutilizing anything. Then you have capacity expansion, deciding whether to increase or decrease your capacity based on your customer demand, based on the market condition or the market fluctuations, or even where you see your business growing towards. So that's how you then decide whether to increase or expand your capacity. Then you have short versus long-term capacity, and this is very much a time frame. I mean, your short-term capacity is, I think, more or less about just varies from 1 day to like 30 days in terms of your time frame. And the decisions here made is influences the scheduling of work within a production unit. And then long term is generally longer than a year. So balancing the short term with the long term capacity planning, your short term is more your seasonal demand spikes, and your long term is where you want sustainability and you want growth. So it's balancing it up. Like for instance, if you're a retailer, like let's say Pick n Pay, for instance, if they're ramping up their temporary staffing or even the space that they have in their warehouse during peak periods, but they're also investing in a long-term automation system so that it can handle their future growth. So short-term, you're getting more people to help us with the volume, but long-term, here's an automation that's going to say, all the sugar goes here, all the flour goes here, all the rice goes there. So just understanding where your decisions are now coming into play, either from a short-term or a long-term perspective. Location, capacity, and even from a distribution side. So deciding where capacity, whether it's a production facility, a warehouse, or even your staff, should actually be located so that you get the maximum efficiency and you're still able to meet your customer demand. So it's like a logistics company basically opening new distribution centers, but it's closer to key cities like Johannesburg and Durban, so all your metropolitan areas, so that they have a reduction in the delivery time and also a transportation cost reduction. So location capacity, very important from that perspective. Balancing capacity and demand. So ensuring that your capacity matches your demand, either by increasing your capacity or managing your demand more effectively. So for instance, if you have a tech company or like a software development company and they offer services like storage or cloud services, they might increase their server capacity either up or down depending on how many users they have, so that there's no disruptions in the the internet or the saving of documents during any sort of demand spikes. So you're balancing it either to scale it up or down. And then flexibility and scalability of capacity. It's basically ensuring that your capacity can be adjusted pretty quickly to meet the changing needs. It must be very flexible. Whether it's temporary labor or adopting another system or adapting a new system, or just investing in a scalable infrastructure where you could move in pretty quickly if you need to. All righty. Any questions here? Are we good so far? Okay, we've got a few more slides to go. Okay, then we go to capacity management. This is basically the process of planning, managing, and optimizing the resources of a business or an organization to ensure that it meets the current and future demands. I think you can see that there's a lot of repetition through, what capacity is, capacity, effectiveness of capacity management. They're basically speaking more or less the same thing. So here we have the different types of capacity management. And the first one here is effective capacity. And it's basically stated as though it's a design capacity. minus all the sort of possible allowances like, you know, absenteeism, personal time, maintenance, etc. And it allows for an organization to anticipate if there's any constraints in the business, and how they can scale up operations. Actual capacity, more from a process or a system perspective, it's stated over a specific time horizon. For example, if a manufacturing company has 2,000 hours available for a week as capacity due to the various constraints like breakdowns and tea breaks, lunch breaks, etc., there's only 1,500 of capacity that's now available. So the quantity of capacity is actually known as actual capacity. All right, and then we have output capacity, and this is best applied if you have a single operation or a single process or a single system. And it can be used in businesses that have very standardized types of product. And for instance, if it's like a JAG, for instance, I know that's a swear word right now. So there's one service or product is produced where a single product's capacity is measured, like how the vehicles are basically produced. So the number of vehicles that's produced per shift will be the measure of their capacity. So the less standardized the output becomes, the less effective is now the measurement. And then the last one is our input capacity, which is more from a low volume perspective. It's more flexible. It's got more of a customized product. If you go and see an architect, for instance, that is building a house or building an office block, it's completely customized to exactly what you need to see. Okay, and then let's move over to our different types. The first one is our strategy formulation. And I mean, when you go through your textbook, you'll be able to see how you basically measure the effectiveness, etc. So how you would is, for instance, it's two types of capacities, which is your actual capacity and your effective capacity. So the example, a lot of the examples is speaking, let's say from a sweets manufacturing perspective, you can manufacture 1,000 units of a specific candy per hour. However, the business only produces 850. So in essence, there's only 85% in terms of efficiency within the business. So you'll be able to work that out. The good thing is your POE doesn't ask you to work out if the capacity or the effectiveness or the efficiency of it. So you'll be in a little bit of a better space. And then we move on to strategy formulation. So capacity planning cannot be a success if it's not included in the business vision, mission, and the strategy. So you need to be able to understand what the strategy is in order for you to do capacity planning. So the following is 4 important capacity decisions that must be taken into account. So the first one is the importance of maintaining a balance throughout the system. So between every single department, there needs to be capacity balance or limitations that is set in order for you to be able to make decisions correctly. The system needs to be flexible. And if there's any changes that take place within it, and what is the times of that needs to be taken into account. And what is the capacity requirements throughout your operations or throughout your organization. So it's understanding how you can then formulate it from that perspective. Then we can go over to our capacity predictions. And from a capacity prediction perspective, there's long and short-term influences, and both need to be taken into account. The determination or understanding what the capacity requirements are in every business is very different. So, some may have a simple production process that allows you to understand capacity right at the beginning and understand what the business needs are, and you're able to do future predictions. But some businesses have a complex supply chains. Based on having complex supply chains, they're not able to predict very well where the capacity is then sitting, because there's various different elements to it. If you're importing or you are storing your items, or you are importing only raw materials and it comes into your organization for manufacturing, you need to then understand what's the different capacities in the various supply chains, because remember, each one of those processes becomes its own supply chain at the end of the day. When you do in the short term, okay, the variation in demand will have a large influences on your capacity requirements. But in your long term, you need to have basically a very accurate demand forecast for a specific time period in order for you to build a capacity prediction. And then the last one is your constraint management. It's quite there's a lot of complexities with capacity planning. So it's always nice to use the theory of constraints, which is TOC. And the steps, which I want you to go over when you get a chance. But the steps, there is 5 steps. So remember the 5 steps. The first one is identify. So every constraint that's within a supply chain is present in a process that must be basically clearly identified. Everyone needs to know what is the problems in that supply chain or in that organization, and then how can they then face those problems or those obstacles. The second one is exploit. So as soon as you know what the problems are and you've now identified the different constraints in your business, what strategies can you now put into place in order for you to conquer them and to be successful? So how do you then manipulate a bottleneck? How can you get stock as quickly as possible in order for you to deliver to your customers, so you have a quicker transit or faster to market than your competitor? So understanding how can you then exploit what you thought was going to be a constraint, and you now put a strategy in place to curb it. Subordinate, so whatever is available in terms of an asset perspective, it must be, you must have the strategies to eliminate any sort of constraint when you have these various assets in place. Different decisions taken to exploit it must be, done from an exploitation perspective. There must be different time frames that's involved, just so that you can take complete advantage of it. Elevate, so the capability of your production system or manufacturing process must be increased. You need to set up a goal, and by achieving this goal, you'll then basically be able to make your constraint a lot smaller than what it is right now. And then the last one is repeat. When your constraint, you've completely eliminated it, you need to just keep going. You need to repeat this again to attack another constraint, because in business, the constraints happen all the time. Can be tangible, it can be non-tangible, it can be a system problem, or it can be where you don't have a training program or a development program for your employees. So you can't exactly do anything from a training side, or even from a development side, or a motivational perspective. You don't have a proper succession planning in place. So it's difficult to keep people motivated when they actually don't know what the future of the business is. Sorry, just give me a second. Just quickly logged out here. Sorry, I'm back. Yeah, so those are the 5 steps. Please go over it when you do have a chance, and we can take it from there when we go through your assignments. And then the last one is developing alternative capacity plans. So the most effective factor is the economic impact that the capacity plan will have on your specific business. So the following questions must be considered when you are developing an alternative capacity plan. The first one is, what option in terms of a new capacity plan will be the most economical, as well as the most realistic. So it needs to be something that probably not tried and tested, but something that you can use to benchmark against a previous plan that can help you to become successful in the future. The second one is, what will the cost be? Is a cost aligned with what your budget is? And if it is, what is the lead time to implement it? Will it be suited for your current operations? Is it going to change your plan completely? Is it going to change the outlook of your business in terms of culture? You need something that is going to be very flexible. So if you're building flexibility into your plan, how can you then use different resources in it, or even different machinery and tools in it, to scale it up or scale it down? What is the contingency plan? So preparing for any disruptions identified, whether it's a demand spike or it's a staff shortage and 10 people decide that they're not coming to work today. How can you then plan for it from a capacity perspective? How can you then use different scenarios like outsourcing, using different vendors, different partners, maybe third-party providers to handle different parts of your business when your internal capacity is strained? A lot of times businesses like to handle everything on their own. So if you are a manufacturing business, you decide that you want to do delivery to your customers, sometimes it's not always efficient to do it like that. And also from a costing perspective, it doesn't always make sense. So it's better to outsource those sort of ideas or materials to somebody who forms part of their core business, basically. Anything from a buffer capacity perspective, so maintaining extra capacity beyond what is normally required, so that you can take into account if there's any unexpectedness in terms of demand or any operational disruptions in your business. How can you then, use that buffer capacity to counteract it? Again, technology, again, innovation, using or implementing different sort of automated systems or technology solutions so that you can make sure that you have a capacity plan that is not solely reliant on a person or an individual or a human being. Maybe it is also stockpiling, for instance, like inventory stockpiling, so holding additional inventory or additional supplies, so that if you have an unanticipated increase in demand or any disruption in your supply chain, you're still able to counter for that. And it also gives you a little bit of buffer within your supply chain. So these are sort of like an alternative capacity plan sort of ideas that you can put into place. And when can you now implement the plan? So number one, it would be when you have sudden demand surges. Like for instance, if there's a huge increase in demand and you can't maintain it with your current primary capacity, so then you click on your alternative capacity plan. If you have any supply chain disruption, meaning if you import all of your raw materials from China and you're manufacturing it locally, and your supplier can't deliver your raw materials on time, you have production delays, you have customers that are unhappy, then it's time to switch on your alternative capacity plan. Maybe that means outsourcing, maybe that means supporting local. Any operational failures, if there is a breakdown in a machine or an equipment from a production perspective, it can impact your capacity or your current capacity plan. Even if there's an IT system glitch and everyone goes offline, it's time then to switch on your alternative capacity. Like for instance, if you're sitting in an office and the Wi-Fi goes down, immediately people switch on to either their hotspot or anything else that they have that is able to then give them internet access. So that is then your alternative capacity plan. If you have staff shortages, so people don't come into work, so normal when you work in a logistics environment, you understand Mondays are a big problem. So on a Monday, when people don't come to work, you now can scale up your alternative capacity plan, and that means maybe outsourcing a labor force from a brokerage, um, and you'll be able to, still have business continuity at the end of the day, and any sort of seasonal fluctuation, like a Christmas and a Black Friday and a Cyber Monday. So just kicking off your alternative capacity plans just for that reason only. So sort of big where your alternative capacity plans come into play, because a lot of times when you're in a production and a manufacturing environment, you understand what your demand forecasts are, and you capacity plan according to that. So having a scalable solution or an alternative capacity plan is sometimes not always needed. So it's always not. So in areas like logistics, for instance, if you're a courier service, you might have to partner with a third-party delivery company so that they can handle any overflows in the peak period. Another industry is like the healthcare industry. So when it's flu season or the pandemic season, the hospitals might activate their alternative capacity plans, setting up different treatment centers or temp treatment centers, bringing in more nursing staff from an agency, just to handle the increased surge in patients. And also, if you're in a retail sector, you rely on temp staff, you rely on temporary warehousing solutions. So if you do have an overflow during high sales periods like Black Friday, you can avoid it. So I know, like, so my husband is also in the logistics industry, and his busiest time is during peak, meaning closer to Christmas, closer to Black Friday, closer to Christmas. The reason being is the retailers like a Pick and Pay and Checkers, etc., their current warehouse facilities at a particular store doesn't have enough capacity to hold the stock. So they put containers, so reefers, etc., on site, and they keep stock in the reefers on site just so that they have an alternate capacity plan, basically. And they're not transporting when and how they need it. It's basically sitting in that container and then just waiting to be sold, and they always then have stock available. So yes, that is basically our capacity planning. Pretty interesting. It can relate a lot to everyday life if you really do look at it and look into it. And it's something that every industry basically uses. So whether you decide you want to go into a logistics environment, a manufacturing, a production, whatever it may be, at some point there's always a capacity plan, and then in other industries there's an alternative capacity plan. So something to always keep in mind, something to remember. I mean, even in your daily life, if you are an employee, what is your capacity plan for yourself? You want to work at 8 to 5, and then at 5 go home to your family, or you're working at 8 to 9, so understanding it from both a personal and a business side. And that's basically us for this Thursday. Is there any questions so far? Yes, it is. It does actually plays quite a big role from a manufacturing side, especially if you have equipment and machinery and people that manage it. You need to be able to plan effectively. Also, with regards to your demand forecast, the number of units that you're manufacturing, all of that is taken into account when you are building your plans. Okay, guys. Thank you so much. You have a fantastic evening, and we will chat not next week, the following week again. All the best. Good night. Stay safe.